All right, we ready?
All
All right.
ready. Sorry.
That's okay. Hi everyone. Welcome to Fuck Wellness. I'm Mallory.
I'm Lara. And I'm McKenna.
Lara, why did you do your mouth so wide open for that?
I really opened my mouth so that McKenna would know that I was going next. I was like, I'm Lara.
Yeah, that is our introductory downfall, is figuring out who's. We really just need a system.
I know. You would think we'd be able to order ourselves, but
yeah. Anyway, we are on to our 4th episode of a dialogue about diagnoses.
Whoa,
also
4th episode.
Yeah. Also, maybe not our wow, I can speak today. Not our most easy to say theme.
Yeah,
ever,
it doesn't roll off the tongue.
No, but that's but it's an alliteration-ish.
You gotta fight for it, and then you know it's good. Our title.
Diagnoses.
That's how you know it's worth it, if it's hard to say.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. We have a guest with us today. Susie is here. She is a former boss of mine, maybe my best boss ever. Hot take.
Ooh.
Definitely someone that I look up to and think is the bomb.com. And I'm super excited to have her here for a dialogue about diagnoses.
Not a second time.
Susie, welcome to the pod.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for putting up with that chaotic opening.
No, it was super cute. I was trying not to giggle all the way throughout it, so I appreciate it.
Okay.
That was a long intro, and we had some technical difficulties, so we've just been kind of like, it was like a little stop and go there for a sec.
Yeah, but we made it. So
yeah,
Susie,
and we're ready to roll.
Yeah, we are so ready to roll right into this. Okay, Susie, I would love if you could start off telling us a little bit about yourself, anything that you feel like you want the listeners to know. You're welcome to use this space to just like do a short bio, or if you want to start here by like giving a little bit of your background, wherever you want to take it right now is up to you.
Yeah. So I live in DC. That's how I know Mallory. We worked together at GW. It's funny because hearing you call me boss, I was like, nah, like I just never really thought. Yeah, no, sure, like I guess on paper, but it's a strange like word to hold, especially like I don't know. I thought of you as very much a peer, so I loved getting to know you in that space, and then after, we worked together at GW at the gym. And so I don't even remember the title of the occupation at that point. What was I, like a manager of health and wellness promotion, something like that. And so Mallory and I were working there together as each of us were kind of getting degrees, both in public health, which is fun. Let me think. So I've been in DC since 2011, if you can do that math. I came here after college, originally going to be a video editor, which now I'm a labor and delivery nurse, so it's kind of an interesting zigzag like a little zigzag to get to where I am, which we'll probably touch on later, but came to do video editing, and then I found that didn't work for me. Then I moved into being a manager at a yoga studio, and from there got into health and wellness and then public health, and then that really scratched a good itch that I was interested in, but it wasn't enough relief. I kept coming back to, I really want to be a nurse, I really want to be a nurse, I really want to be a nurse for like probably 8 years, and I just kind of kept putting it off, and it'll be interesting to kind of discuss further about how ADHD got into play with delaying my ultimate decision to become one. But I, for the past year and a half now, have been a labor and delivery nurse in Washington, D.C. So I am currently now in that space, and I'm really proud to say that. It's been a huge journey, lots of work, lots of self-growth. So that's who I am. And then the reason why I'm here is because I was diagnosed with ADHD, I think about a year and a half ago, after a long struggle with not knowing what was going on and just assuming that I was a human being that just was experiencing life as others, and then finally got an answer that I was a little different. So here I am.
Wow. That was a really good intro. Very
Oh,
comprehensive.
thank you.
I also
Appreciate it.
really would like to hear more. We don't have to do it right off the bat, but about your
Mhm.
job transition. I think that is super, super awesome. And I don't know, I feel like there's so many people who have that thing in the back of their head for so long. And then for
Mhm.
whatever reason, they're like, oh, well, this is the reason why I'm not going to pursue it, or this, or this, or this. And I don't know,
Mhm.
it's just kind of like a really cool thing that you went after it.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate that. It's something that I was able to, I don't want to say impress myself with because it sounds a little lofty. It's just that I doubted my ability for so long that you kind of put something on a pedestal so long and don't assume that you can actually achieve it, and then put in the grunt work, and believe me, I tortured myself and suffered through it. But the fact that I'm really proud of what I do, and I enjoy what I do, and it aligns with the way my brain works, is just, I'm so thankful. And I searched for so long. So yeah.
I don't even feel like oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lara.
Before we pivot,
Yeah.
I don't know if your question was a pivot, but like, I would love to know kind of what were your inner thoughts, or what was your inner dialogue when you were kind of doing your other things and finding other
Mhm.
jobs. Was it kind of like, there's this other thing I'm thinking about and maybe we'll do it later, or there's no way I can do this other thing, so I better just make what I have work right now? And like, what was I need to know the turning point. When did you set off to do this cool thing that you do
Yeah.
now?
Well,
No,
okay,
I was like, give
wait.
us
I'm
hope.
happy to get into it.
I'm adding on because my question was not a pivot. It was pretty much Lara's question, but
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm adding on just I remember you taking nursing classes, or at least nursing adjacent classes, when you were doing full-time job at
Mhm.
Learner. And so, yeah, I similar to Lara, I don't feel like we ever really talked about the point
Mhm.
where you went from, okay, this that I'm doing right now is a career, to, no, I'm going to go back to school. I don't really remember what was going
Yeah.
through your head at that time.
I just got chills. Just because I like
I got
that.
chills too.
Because I just, when you're saying what you were experiencing, I remember so vividly being in that space as well. And the fact that you were saying like, oh, we didn't talk about it, was a kind of masking self-protection mechanism that I wasn't really even aware of. But the arc basically was, and it's hard because I'm like, after the diagnosis, I've been finding myself like putting puzzle pieces together, being like, oh, where every kind of move seemed really random, and just like most people, if I, once I was moving from video editing to health and wellness, specifically first through working at a yoga studio, a lot of people were like, oh, okay, all right. And then, from the yoga studio to like public health. But, the reason actually I went into public health was because I first applied to an exercise physiology program at GW and worked my tail off to get to it. And I got a scholarship associated with it. And they had canceled the program after accepting me, and after I had worked my butt off, and Mallory knows like how to work really hard to get to the scholarship we could talk about. And so, I mean, so lots of devastation, lots of turning points that really didn't make sense at the time. Then public health was basically offered to me from GW, being like, hey, like you can either, they have a program for exercise physiology in Connecticut, or you can stay here with your scholarship and go into public health. And I was like, okay. And that actually was helpful in showing me, working with patient populations and the impact on how human interaction can aid or hurt the health of the public, which then basically showed me that I was interested in that space, and that I needed more task-oriented job tasks, I guess. Like basically with ADHD, we can talk further about it. Task-oriented behavior is really, really helpful. And so I found that with public health, it was just a very wide arc of an arching coverage of what we could do, whereas nursing is very specific and task to task to task to task. So let me just try to think backstory though. However, thinking about nursing now and then how I got to nursing, it all makes sense because basically I got into video editing because I loved the idea of being on a movie set, which is hilarious because by going into video editing, I realized that you are not in fact on a movie set. You are editing videos in a black room looking at a computer screen with no one else, to talk to except for maybe, someone coming in and out asking for, deliverables. But I love the idea of being active and being task oriented and working towards a goal with others. And so I also found myself loving to go to movies because I was able to focus on what was in front of me. It was there, it's riveting usually. If not, then I will probably fall asleep. But most movies that I gravitated towards were really exciting. And so I basically tried to think about the future. And I was like, well, I want to embody this feeling that I'm feeling when I sit in a movie theater. And it seems, very active and fun and also directed towards something specific. And so I was like, oh, okay, I want to work in movies. And then I found a video editing media arts and design degree and then followed that through torturously in college because, if you think about trying to change up your behavior and your coping strategies with ADHD, even if especially if it's undiagnosed and you go into a new space such as college, good Lord. But got through that. And then, and I say that lightly, but like, oh gosh, it takes a village and a very active brain. Then I got into DC and found that video editing wasn't for me and I actually got fired, which thank God. Yoga was actually basically something that I was enjoying as I was working. And I found myself just like gravitating towards it. And the word hyper focusing now makes sense to me because that's a term that's really widely used in the ADHD community. I found myself hyper focusing on yoga and I was finding happiness in that space. And so when I got fired from video editing, I went to the yoga studio. I was like, I need a job. This is basically like, it's going to hold me over until I figure out what I want to do with my life. Luckily, I really loved that space being a manager, and a manager in that space is almost like a customer service person because you're working at the front desk, you're having interactions, you're fixing issues that are right there in front of you, you're helping people understand, classes and what they probably would or would not like or should try. It's a lot of like problem fix, problem fix, problem fix, problem fix, which I absolutely loved. And it was the first time that I actually found that I felt smart and not stupid, which is a hard journey to now rewind and like go through again as I process things because for much of my life, when trying to one, grow up and then two, figure out what I wanted to do, I felt stupid and just odd. But with the yoga manager job, I was like, oh, I'm actually good at something and they're actually appreciating my input and my work ethic that was previously told to me to be distracted and just inefficient and not making enough money for the company, whereas now I was like, oh, I'm actually useful. And then with that knowledge that I loved the idea of being dynamic, I also had gone through a few health issues, one of which was I had a tumor on one of my parathyroid glands. And so I was spending some time in the hospital and I got to see how dynamic that space was, obviously with tons of different emotions aside. I could see the people working there just like working on tasks and educating people about what they were experiencing and helping people go through hard things, go through even, good things. But I found myself enjoying my time at the hospital as a patient, which like for me it sounds kind of strange to say, it's almost like self-centered, but I enjoyed that space, albeit with I still, went through some hard things, and I'm fine now, and it was all benign, but it had some long lasting issues that I still have to go through. But I enjoyed being at the hospital by seeing others working around me, and I found myself thinking, oh, if I hadn't gone into video editing, or like my next lifetime, like almost like a jab, like, oh, next lifetime I'll be a nurse. Next lifetime I'll be a nurse. Next lifetime I'll be a nurse. And I found myself talking with the staff and like, oh, like what's it like being a nurse? Like it sounds so interesting. And they wouldn't necessarily sugarcoat it when I was asking them the questions, but I always found myself gravitating towards what the nurses were doing, and like even down to looking at IVs when they were being placed on me, which is really strange to say, but I'm like, what is this? This is so cool. Like, what are you doing? Like, this is awesome. Can I watch? And they're like, sure. Weird patient. Okay. And so I found myself more and more mourning the loss of not being a nurse when I was something else, and knowing that, oh, if I could do it over again, I would be a nurse. And that thought just kind of kept coming back. But I also had the conflicting internal dialogue of, Susie, like when you were in college and high school, like science was your nemesis. Math, don't even like talk about that. You had such, stress. You had to sit through hours of trying to teach yourself how to do these things that so many people understood already just by being in the class. I had to, go home and then teach myself what I was supposed to have learned in the class. And so the thought of having to like go get a degree in science was like, that's not achievable. Like, that's really sad. Like, it's unfortunate, but it's not achievable. But finally the kind of arc of the story, or like the turning point of the story, was that like something that's torturous about ADHD, but also really helpful, is that you tend to ruminate, like ruminate and ruminate and ruminate. And it got to the point, and this happens a few times in my life, where like rumination, while it's terrible, like you can't get rid of it until you change something. And so the only way that I could get rid of the feeling that I would regret my life if I, which is sad to say, but I would regret my life if I didn't become a nurse, that rumination started becoming so loud that I was like, I have to do this. And I know it probably sounds like a strange transition to people on the outside, but my internal dialogue for the past God knows how long has been just like, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, you're going to regret it, you're going to regret it. And my internal judgment is so like digging that I just finally had to be like, okay, all right, I need to do this. This is going to freaking suck, but I got to do this. And so that kind of made my decisions for me.
To go back a tiny bit, you mentioned in some of your jobs that you maybe didn't feel appreciated or seen, or that you even maybe felt stupid in some of those jobs. Is that something that you felt growing up in school, or how was, I guess, in general, your schooling experience?
Yeah, it's interesting to now, like in hindsight, look back, because I got really good grades throughout all of my, school career, you could call it, and I loved learning. However, I was so tortured all the way through it without really like completely understanding that I was, because it's I didn't realize that my way of learning it was different than so many other people, where a lot of people, and this is a generalization, of course, but looking back, I'm seeing that like so many of my peers and friends were in a classroom and they were learning the topic of the day, and I was not following. It was almost as if, let me try to think of a good kind of example of it would be, all right, let me see if I can try this to make sense to everybody. Imagine that you're like sitting in a car with a radio, and you know how it sometimes starts to come in and out with static, or even like you're trying to change the channels and find a good song. You find a good song and you're like, okay, this is a good song, good song, good song. And then the channel starts to change. It's a little staticky. You kind of go back to what you were listening to a little bit. You can hear it, but not really. And then the channel completely switches. But then you find that everyone around you is singing the lyrics to the song that you had just heard. And they know all of the lyrics because they just learned them. And you were not aware that that was the assignment. And also, what song are they trying to, like, what are they singing? That's basically my experience when it comes to school, because I would be sitting in a classroom and I just didn't pay attention. And it wasn't like I was like, I'm not paying attention. I would be sitting there so hard, like sitting there trying to pay attention so hard. And sometimes I would be able to pay attention. But then the amount of work at home that I had to do to actually teach myself what was taught to me in my own way, like I basically went to school like 5 times each year. So it's like the amount of time that I had to spend to actually get the basics of what people were being taught, at least I personally feel now looking back, it was just a lot of work. That was confirmed to me when I went to nursing school, which is a fun story that I'll get into in a second. But yeah, it was tumultuous, and I didn't realize it. I find that looking back now, I had a happy childhood, but I also was just kind of seeped in melancholy without, like, I never knew why, but whenever, even before my diagnosis, I was like, I mean, I love my childhood, but like, I feel as if I have this connection with my inner child of just like sadness and just kind of not being fulfilled, and also having this like itch to, I don't even know, do something else, find an adventure, and just being stagnant and just struggling internally. It's we'll get into with ADHD. Most of my manifestation is internal, albeit I do have external tendencies, but most of what I have ADHD, like the symptoms that I have, is internal hyperactivity and inattentiveness, but internal hyperactivity that just causes a lot of melancholy. So, and I laugh, but it's like it has been a very long and arduous journey. So where we are right now.
I would just like to say that you are so good at just telling this story. Like I have just been like really following. And sometimes I feel like when people will, without like a lot of back and forth, I kind of get a little lost, but I was so on every step of that journey. So
Good.
really, thank you.
No, thank you.
I think, I mean, so many parts of this are interesting and I want to like dive into them more, but the part of feeling different from peers in school, or feeling like your style of learning is so different than any other of your friends, like I just so heavily relate to that. And I think that I felt so when I was like even in high school and college, having to learn things differently than it felt like every other person in my lecture hall. I felt like I just felt so stupid. Like I just felt so like I should not be here. I do not belong. I should have chosen something different or done an easier class or something. Like, and it just sucks that different brains work different ways and it's taught in like a way that fits 1 to 2 brains. Like
it's very ostracizing, I think, is maybe a good word to kind of put out there. It's a very ostracizing experience when you feel as if you are missing, you're just not grasping what's going on when everyone else is like, oh, I got it, okay, cool, next.
Yeah And I think that like maybe in connection to that, or maybe not, but what you were talking about with kind of seeing how certain parts of video editing did fit parts of what you wanted, like working with a team, having direct effect on something that you loved, movies. Like I love movies. I can so see how for you, like that felt like a match. And I think it's really difficult to be like I love these 4 facts or these 4 ways that this fits what I want to do with my life, but there's still something missing. And even though there's just like a little teeny voice in my head, I still have to listen to it. Like that's so hard to do, especially when you're good at the job, like, especially when you're getting praised. That is so freaking hard. And when you know that it's going to include like school and really hard classes and a lot of pain, like I'm just, wow. I'm
Lara,
so
I
happy
feel
you
like you're
did
also
it.
talking about yourself.
I am very heavily talking about myself.
I mean, do you have ADHD?
But also
Because,
you.
like maybe, but like being serious.
Maybe.
Well, honestly, and this actually like to like segue. I don't mean to do this intentionally, but it makes sense in the sense that so many people, especially women, go undiagnosed, and or if they are diagnosed with something, yeah, that might be correct, but it also can be that it's not a complete diagnosis, and it's like maybe you're scratching the itch of a diagnosis, say with anxiety or depression, but maybe it's something else that is causing those things. And for me, it was ADHD. So, in the sense that I run into a lot of people that I find that I'm able to communicate well with and I enjoy their company. I'm not saying that they are ADHD, and maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but they have a lot of the qualities that I appreciate in that neurodivergent kind of space. One of which is, being able to be fully engaged in something, but then, being able to switch topics, really quickly, or being able to admit to, inner turmoil. And that's something that not many people are willing to necessarily admit. But I feel like, at least what I found is that whenever I'm able to, open up the space and be like, hey, like I suffer a lot, it often opens up the space for others to be like, oh, me too. Not, is that not necessarily quote unquote normal? I'm like, I don't know, but it might mean something. So just something to kind of put out there.
Yeah. No, 100%. There's just a lot of things. I think that for so much of my life, it was, and still currently, like I can function and I can fight through it, but it's like, does that feel good? Or do you necessarily always need to do that? Yeah, no, I've thought about it. I like this theme.
It just that just reminds me of a conversation that I had with I think this conversation was with my sister. I've had a few conversations, obviously a ton with them. My 2 sisters, they've just been like, one of which was the reason why I got diagnosed with ADHD. And I tell her so frequently that I'm like, you've saved my life. Not in the sense that I, luckily, thank goodness, never really reached this suicidal feeling that I know a lot of people with, numerous disorders or just in general having struggles feel. I did not ever feel that way, but she opened my eyes to this diagnosis. But when I was speaking with my other sister, just talking about, I think, like adulting, basically, like I was in my 20s. I'm currently 34, just to give perspective. I was probably about 25 or 6, where I had really started to kind of suffer from the effects of this undiagnosed ADHD. And I was like, it's kind of akin to, adulting, where it's hard to go through, various things. You're just really reaching and really working and really trying to do what, most people are just kind of doing on their own. And like, is that okay? Like, should you really struggle this much? She's like, well, I don't know. Like, yeah, adulting is hard. I was like, yeah, it is. It's kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of akin to like being in a back alley and like getting in a like fist fight that you didn't choose to be in. And then like, whatever is fighting you is just like pummeling you, and you're like, okay, all right, I can do this, it's fine. And then that whatever being just smacks the crap out of you, and you're like, oh, I'm done. And you just kind of face plant in the ground. Like, yeah, that's a lot of work. And that, maybe you shouldn't have to fight some like random being in an alley figuratively in your brain to be able to adult. Maybe not
Yeah.
Always.
And then walk back inside and people be like, why are you
and smile
upset?
or not.
Why are you tired?
Yeah, for sure. Or like mask it and be like, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine. Like, I'm just smiling through it. It's fine. My eyes are just, I have allergies. It's fine. So
Okay, I want to go a little bit more to the process of getting diagnosed.
Yeah.
So you said you had a conversation with your sister, but like
Mhm.
when was the point that it went from acknowledging symptoms of something
Mhm.
to thinking this might be ADHD? I want to figure out what this is.
Yeah, sure. I think what might be helpful, at least in the process of the explanation, is probably like defining what ADHD is, if that's okay. Um, it's
No, you're not
basically,
allowed to
please.
define it on the podcast. Absolutely not.
I'm like pulling up my notes because I was like, I just need to make sure I know what I'm talking about because I have the diet disorder, and I'm like, I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about because I have imposter syndrome. But basically, ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, which is not the best name in the world because it basically is saying that there is, a deficit of attention, which, I mean, maybe it is a little bit of a symptom of ADHD, but it has nothing really to do with the overarching issue, which is basically you have not a deficit of attention, you almost have like extra attention, and it's just the issue is the ability to focus. Like, while say you're someone who is quote unquote neurotypical, who's in like a classroom in school, yeah, you're not really enjoying, say, the lecture that you're having to learn, but 70 to 80% of your attention can kind of be in that space where like the rest of it may be daydreaming. Whereas with ADHD, at least in my experience, it's kind of flipped where I can put like 25 to 30 in like this space and trying to pay attention, but then the other part of me, 70% or so, is like, okay, Susie, you got to pay attention because that's what everyone else is doing. Okay, so you're paying attention. Okay. Oh, wait. By trying to pay attention, you're not really listening to what they're saying. Okay. So what are they saying? Oh, okay, interesting. Well, my shoe is a little bit untied. I might want to figure that out. Oh, but my foot is now uncomfortable, so I'm going to go ahead and try to fix that. And then it's just like you just go off on a tangent in your brain, which can be daydreaming, where that's like a symptom of ADHD, where it's like, oh, they daydream a lot. It's like, okay, that would be nice. Daydreaming sounds kind of tranquil. And it's not necessarily, I mean, yeah, it can be tranquil because we're basically one of the main reasons why ADHD is a thing is that in the brain, people with ADHD have issues with the neurotransmitters, dopamine and norepinephrine, which are basically like the feel good hormones. And they can, be released when you're having fun. And, it basically allows you to stay motivated. Um, you, it's, you might have to edit this part out because I don't know if it's like serotonin, but it's kind of in the family of serotonin as well. But we have either a lack of the neurotransmitter or the inability to kind of metabolize the neurotransmitter. And so it's not that we can't focus, it's that our brain is literally like salivating for stimulation. And it's not like, oh, look at her, she's daydreaming. It's like, no, her brain literally is trying to basically make up for the lack of the really important hormone that others have naturally. And in order to do that, she has to therefore, her brain is just moving a lot faster. Not saying that she's smarter. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that her brain has to have so much more stimulation to be able to be in that space. And that stimulation can usually also encompass being distracted or being hyperactive, where maybe you're fidgeting, maybe you're moving, maybe, the quintessential diagnosis is like that 10-year-old boy in class who's just like really loud and just disruptive. Like those are the ones that usually get diagnosed early because they're the ones who are the squeaking wheel. They're disrupting space. Whereas, yes, that's part of ADHD, but that also can manifest internally as well. And so in the brain, you could be just your brain's moving quick, 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 but it's also maybe you're ruminating. Maybe you're ruminating on really hard things. Maybe you're anxious. Maybe your anxiety is caused by your ruminations. It's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg, anxiety or ADHD. They interplay with each other. And so a lot of the rumination has to do with anxious thoughts. And so I would love to daydream, but usually it's a matter of just like every 30 seconds returning to something that is just impacting my life. Like, am I happy in my career? Am I happy in my relationship? Are other people happy in their friendships? I don't have as many friendships as other people have. They seem fulfilled by their career. I'm not yet, but is that normal or is it not? Is it Instagram? Like, is that just like a picture of their life and it's not actually true? Like, it's just all that stuff all at once at a very fast pace. And you're supposed to be in a classroom, like listening to what the lecturer is talking about. So that's kind of a little bit of example of what ADHD is. And as an example of which, I forget what you asked me in the first place, but you'll have to remind me. Oh, how did I get diagnosed? There you go. Woo! Feel free to keep that in. It's a really good example.
Nice.
So anyway, my older sister, growing up, I knew that she had what's called a learning disability and a hearing processing disorder. And so she's wicked smart. She has, I mean, she's not going to tell you this, but like, I think her IQ is just like astronomically insane. She was in the gifted program, but she also got attention elsewhere for a hearing processing disorder. And so as she grew older, she was suffering more and more with what we thought was this disorder, and it may be, but she finally went to doctors and doctors and doctors and found a space in Colorado, and I'm forgetting what the name is, but it's basically a space in which you can get diagnosed with ADHD. And it is actually free or very much reduced in the amount of money that you have to pay to get the diagnosis, which, side note, is terrible. If you can prove that it's gotten in the way of like your ability to live your life. And so she went to that space and she got actually diagnosed with ADHD. And later we learned that hearing processing and learning disabilities run hand in hand with ADHD. So maybe she has both, maybe she has just ADHD. It's hard to say. But she started learning more and more about ADHD and how it manifests. And so she learned more and more that yes, while ADHD can be this hyperactive kid who just can't sit still, that's just like the tip top corner of like the diagnosis for children who are cis boys. Like has nothing to do with what the actual picture is. And so she started noticing more and more that I was displaying similar characteristics as what she was. Just depression. I actually got diagnosed with general anxiety disorder and major depressive disorder. I think I've been to a number of therapists and they've each kind of had their own spiel. But that those words have been kind of interplayed in my therapy experience since I was about 25. And she basically started noticing that I was spiraling away from being able to cope. So if you do some research in ADHD, you'll find that a lot of coping strategies are masking is one where you basically don't want to show that you are different than others. And it's not like I'm like, oh, I'm different than others, I should mask it. It's kind of like an inherited learned trait, especially as a female, like at least my experience of people pleasing and making sure people know that like I'm happy and that we're good, like that got so interwoven into like who I was that that was some coping strategies. But then when you start to go through in your 20s and teens, 20s and early 30s, you're like, okay, life changes drastically, and those coping strategies start to kind of fall away and they're not as readily available to you. The ones that you've say built up in your childhood, they can no longer really apply. And so she started seeing that I was suffering, and I was really suffering to the point that I wasn't really sharing with really anyone. I mean, Mallory, and you knew me at this space, like I don't think that you and I talked about much when it came to mental health and such. We would certainly touch on it, but I never was like, Mallory, I'm going through absolute hell. Like
No.
I wouldn't really allude to it. And I feel as if I probably masked it pretty well, but I was
super
I
well.
was really
Congratulations.
suffering. Hey, thanks.
Kidding.
Here's a gold medal. So I got really good at masking. But those masking strategies while working on the outside, like just led to more and more inner turmoil to the point that it was just manifesting as, major depressive disorder and anxiety, just sitting in my room, I live in a studio, which has been actually a pretty awesome safe haven for this experience. But I would be sitting on my bed for probably 3 hours sobbing. And at that point, it was because I was ruminating on the fact that the surgeries that I had to have because of the tumor that I had mentioned earlier was causing hair loss. And I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go bald, and then I'm gonna, it's okay to go bald, but also it's like it's a lot. Oh God, like it's just like a lot of inner turmoil when it comes to physical appearance, but then also your brain's moving so quickly because of the ADHD that you're like, okay, I'm just gonna go do something else, and then it just goes right back to whatever the topic of choices of your brain for that year. Because I went through that specific hyperfixation for probably 2 years of like losing my hair, which I lost a lot of hair and I have a receding hairline, but like we've gotten better. We're fine. We found some coping strategies, but like the sheer amount of just like sobbing and looking at the mirror every single time I walk by the mirror and just like putting my hands to my head and just like, where is it? Did it get worse? Like over and over and over and over and over again. And it would be every 30 seconds that, regardless of the day time, I mean, if I was sleeping, I was sleeping, but like when I woke up, I'd be like, oh crap, it's here. Like whatever I was ruminating on, it's here. And so I would go through my 12 to 16-hour day awake every 30 seconds, regardless of the topic. If I was talking to somebody, I'd be talking with them, and then my brain would shift to the rumination of what was going on elsewhere. And so that became more and more and more and more deleterious and exhausting. That as well juxtaposed with my decision to go to nursing school, which was a savior because it led to the diagnosis. Because I was thinking about a story to tell to kind of put you into the perspective of my brain before I got the diagnosis. With nursing school, basically there's a certain routes you can take, one of which is if you've already had a degree, you can do an accelerated program, which is like, yeah, it's 16 months and you have a degree, but also like it's like 90 hours of work a week of just like you're going to school at 5:30 in the morning. I was driving out an hour to get there and then going to classes that I didn't understand for multiple reasons, and then getting tested pretty much daily, and then coming home trying to study till about midnight and then doing it all over again, with the fact that I couldn't follow what was going on because of the ADHD. So I found that I was recording the lectures. Oh, poor Susie. I was recording the lectures and I'm trying to pay attention, but not getting any of the information while everyone's like, yep, got it. All right, that's hard topic. But yeah, I got it. I'd come home and have to play back the recording, like 5 seconds. What the professor says, I would have to therefore write it down on a piece of paper, exact word for word, and then play it again, and then stop, and then write down. So basically it would be like 1 3-hour lecture would then therefore cause, I don't know, 10 hours of having to relearn it, to the point that got to be too much. And one perspective that I got was, this is probably 2 months in, where it was like all new, all just like fire hose to your face of just all this new information. The program itself is known to be like pretty rough, like it's just really anxiety provoking. And so the professor, I think in an attempt to be like, hey, you guys are all anxious, anxiety is okay, like you'll bond together in your trauma of anxiety, like sweet, just so that everyone didn't have imposter syndrome, she basically handed out a piece of paper that was like an anxiety survey that was not graded, but like scored on the number of, yeses that you marked off with life experiences of anxiety. Like, how does anxiety manifest in your life? Do you experience, ruminating thoughts daily? Yes, et cetera, probably, I think 40 questions. And so we all were taking this little survey, and then after 10 minutes, she, had us all kind of bring our attention back, which is funny. Bring our attention back to the front, and she was like, okay, so let's see. who in the room has, like 5 or less anxiety, points? And then like a few people were like, yeah, I got just 5 or less. And I was like, all right. And then she's like, okay, all right, just a few of you, cool. All right, who in the room has, 10 or so yeses? And so more people raised their hands. And she was like, all right, cool, look around, you got people, And then she said, okay, 15 or more, and people kept raising. She's like, okay, 20 or more. I'm sorry, 20 or less. 20 or less. And so hands rose. And she then stopped grading. And she started saying, well, look around you. See, everyone has anxiety, and that's okay. Like, you will get through this together. And in my brain, I was like, why did she stop counting? Like, why did she stop counting? I'm like, did she forget? Like, what's going on? And she was like, well, people with 20 or so, that's called high anxiety. And I was like, I have 33. I didn't say that, but that kind of woke me up to being like, okay, this is different. The hard part is about mental disorders and diagnoses is that, like, you have to, in order to figure out that there's a problem, you have to know that there's a comparison. And so, I went around living my life per normal, living what I thought was a normal human experience. And I was suffering, but I felt as if most humans were suffering, and they do. And I'm not discounting that for at all. However, unlike, say, illnesses like cancer, where sometimes you have parameters to meet. We're like, okay, there's a tumor here, or there's a lab result here, that lead you towards a diagnosis. And I'm not saying that there are illnesses that are unclear and people suffer and there is pain for no apparent reason. So I don't want to take that away. I'm just generalizing for the sake of this point. For mental disorder diagnoses, you have to have a comparison, but you are the only person that you really know how to compare yourself to, because that's your only lived experience. And so when these diagnoses come up being like, do you suffer, more days than not for 6 months? I'm like, yeah, but what does that mean? What is normal? What is suffering? And so a lot of my journey came to be like, is my suffering getting in the way of my life? And my sisters finally were seeing that that was the case, that I was no longer functioning in the way that they were used to. And also at school, I was studying for an exam at like 11:30 p.m., went to bed knowing that I had probably 5 hours left to study, and I had a 9 a.m. exam. I woke up in a panic attack. Like, I woke up in a panic attack. It wasn't like it just got let on. I just woke up and I was like, and I had thought that I had experienced panic attacks before. This was like undying dread, shaking, like rocking back and forth, like ultimate doom feeling. And I can't even really describe it really well. And then the knowledge that I still had to study for the exam coming forward. And so it got to the point where I was like, I need to go to the hospital. Like, I can't get out of this space. I need to go to the hospital, or else this is not gonna, like, there's no way to, like, I needed a reset, like almost like I don't know, like a jolt of, I don't know, sanity or something. But I was like, I need to go to the hospital, and they need to do something or give me something to get me out of space, because I will be here and I can't live in here for more than another 3 minutes. And then luckily I finally was like, breathe. And then that slowly I was able to get out of it. But the next day I called my doctor. I was like, something's going on. And so she gave me Zoloft, and I was like, I think it's ADHD. She's like, okay, maybe, but probably not. It's probably anxiety. It's probably related to what you're going through. Zoloft is actually good for both ADHD and anxiety. So let's just get you on Zoloft. And like, that was awesome. I felt relief that I hadn't felt in probably 4 years. And I felt as if I was actually able to engage in life. But that was, probably 6 to 8 months before I actually got diagnosed with ADHD. I was still feeling just like something was just not right, and I was still suffering in my school and feeling as if I was missing something all the time, which my sister, who had been diagnosed, was like, Susie, this is the exact symptoms that I've had, and I got diagnosed. And for me, I was like, me, Susie, I was poor at that point, still am, but like didn't have money to just like throw out for diagnoses. And the therapists that I were seeing were like, I don't know, you might have something, but like you're not like super hyperactive. Like any diagnoses that we can find for you, it's going to cost like a lot of money to that's out of network. And so it was a lot of just me being like, I can't do that. So I'm just going to say that I have anxiety and depression and call it a day, and suffer. And then my older sister, who I've been talking about, she's like, Susie, no, like I will lend you the money, like go. And luckily that kind of juxtaposed with just life happenings of just going through really tough transitions, including nursing, but also personal. It was just, I finally had reached my rock bottom, and I was like, this has got to be something. And so I was with a new therapist at that point, and I was like, I gotta figure this out. This is getting to the point that every 30 seconds of my life, I am in utter dread of the next 30 seconds. And so she luckily put me in touch with a psychiatrist that she had worked with earlier in her career. And that psychiatrist, I forget if I think I must have paid probably like $100. It was during COVID. So the process actually was a lot simpler to get diagnosed, at least for me. You'll hear about people who have to go through like eons of wait lists and have to go to in-person testing facilities, and they have to like track your like eyeballs when they put a certain screen up to see if you're like attentive to where your eye, like following the stimulus or not, all that stuff. And then also, interviewing your loved ones to see if they have noticed anything. I luckily didn't have to go through any of that. Because of COVID at that point, she was basically like, this is an expedited survey, similar to kind of what I experienced at nursing school with the anxiety survey. But it was probably 100 questions of like, how often do you experience fidgeting? How often do you ruminate? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I took that, and I found myself like, as I do in life, kind of downplay things and mask things. So even in the survey, I was like, maybe I don't do that much, even though in my brain I was like, I do that like every day. But even with those answers, my results came back in the 70th, I think, percentile of ADHD. And of the 3 types of ADHD, one of which is inattentive, the other is hyperactive, and then the third is combined. I was the combined, where I was inattentive, where my thoughts would wander, but then also I was hyperactive both externally and internally. And so that was the kind of ultimate answer and relief. As soon as that diagnosis came out, I was like, oh, thank God. Just because it was like leveling up into a sphere that I'd never even known was there, to be able to start figuring out my life as to up to this point, what just happened, and then moving forward. So
I am really resonating with a lot of the things that you're saying. And also, you just jogged a memory in me that I totally forgot about, but I think is really interesting. And I think that, like, I don't know why it took a pandemic for it to be easier to get diagnosed with things that are happening. Like, that's not great. But that just jogged a memory in me that when I was in college, I kind of remember, and this is a lot of, of my life that I don't feel anymore because I'm not in that place of like super high anxiety about classes and tests and stuff.
For sure.
But I remember taking tests and going into finals and going into midterms and just being like, I know that I'm different from my peers because I can't even get a big bite. I can't even get a small bite out of this test, much less finish it. Like something is wrong. And I remember I had a therapist at the time, and he had kind of urged me like to look into the extra time allotments through like whatever, I don't even know what Michigan office it was, but he was like, look into this, like ask about extra time on your exams, ask about extra time on your homework. Like you have to be given a fair shot. And right now your brain isn't giving you a fair shot to even get after this stuff. And so I did.
That dude sounds really cool, by the way. That's not normal.
No, it was awesome that he urged me to do that, because I remember being like, well, that's not for me. Like I don't have this title attached to my name or this official diagnosis that I can then just, offer up and then get extra time. Like I don't have anything like that. They're going to laugh at me and tell me to, kick rocks. Like it's not going to work. And finally, because of COVID, it was literally just like, sign up on this person's Google Calendar to have a 20-minute meeting about your extra time allotment. And I finally did it. And I got on the Google meeting with her. And I remember literally being like almost in tears that I was asking for this, like for this, some big privilege that I felt like I didn't deserve. And she was so sweet and was basically like, thank you for doing this for you. Like, we absolutely are giving it to every single person that is asking us right now.
Good.
Like you didn't even have to meet with me. If you had just emailed me, like we would have made it happen for you. Like,
good.
You don't have to prove anything to me, because I thought I would have to like show my passport, like some sort of like pass some test to be able to do this. But she was like, yeah, you got it. I'll send you the form right now. You're good to go.
Oh,
they're like,
awesome.
answer this riddle.
Yeah, literally. I thought I'd have to like go on some adventure to get this privilege, but it was just
they no, it's true. Like the universities especially make it that way, and I remember the same experience for many classes where it was just like, I don't have this ability to have, I don't have diagnosis. I'm not someone who I don't want to say that I have something that I don't, and put myself ahead of others, quote unquote, but really you're like way behind. But
right,
and the fact that you're actually reaching out to do that, like that is an indication of something. It's like you wouldn't be there if you didn't have a reason. And I think that if you wanted to like get a step ahead of people, like maybe that's a way of doing it, but like it's a lot of work. Like you gotta like do emails for that kind of stuff. So I think that there's a reason why you're in that space, and I'm so glad that they validated that, because you give your firstborn child that you don't have and a passport, and then it's like that's what they make it sound like.
And because I think that because of past like things that I had heard, or maybe it was even just like stuff I saw in movies, I thought that I for sure at least needed some sort of the right thing on the right piece of paper with the right signature. And I was like, I don't have that. And I honestly do think that like in the past and maybe now you do need that, but literally it was like COVID. They were like, we like,
fast forward through all
we've got you, right?
The random patriarchal processes.
Yes, exactly. So thank you for jogging that memory.
Oh, sure. My pleasure. I'm sorry that you went through that. I know the experience, so I'm so sorry. I have a memory of being in a statistics class at age 25-year-old adult, like sobbing in my master's degree, sobbing to my statistics professor, being like, this is like, oh my God. And I had two professors in that semester, one of which was like, okay, like tough love, like. And I think I remember asking her for resources for what you're talking about, like, better allotment of time. And she's like, well, no, like you need to, say the riddle, say the rhyme, like know the
Mhm.
right person, like,
Yeah.
stand on your head and then, spin in circles and then call it a day. Not by any means to take away from those that have been diagnosed and use those facilities. I don't mean to by any means say anything bad about that whatsoever. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that at all. Mine is more speaking towards the stigma of undiagnosed individuals, like
Yes.
people just assuming that you're just like tough love, you got to go through it. I went through it, so you got to go through it. That is where I'm just like, "Ugh." And so I had that one professor who just gave me no time of day, and then the other professor who I was sobbing to, like, you literally are speaking gobbledygook, and nobody, like, everyone else in the room is like, oh, cool, interesting. And I was like,
Mhm.
what?
Yeah.
And it got to the point that there was like a final coming up, and I was just like, I have reached my limit. I've like, with the money that I don't have, I've like used my student loans to hire a tutor to like try to figure this out. And I still have no idea what's going on. And she was so sweet. She was like, okay, it's okay. It's okay. And I was like in the middle of the hallway. Like people were like, what the fuck is going on with this girl? And she's like, let's go talk. And she was someone like your professor who was like, yeah, let's talk about this. The fact that you're needing some of this time is an indication that this is in fact what you need. So she was actually, even though it was like a cumulative final exam in statistics and I had to hyper focus for 24 hours before the exam to actually do well, and let alone like understand what was going on, she like was like, here is a room for you to take the exam. You can take the exam starting 2 hours before the rest of the class, so you have 4 hours instead of two, and here you are, like, go for it. And so that, even just being seen in that, like, did wonders. Like I was, rather than being like I can't, someone being like, here is a life board, now go try swimming,
Mhm.
rather than sinking. Like that is a big difference.
Yeah.
Then yeah.
Absolutely.
I think we need to wrap in a second, but
Mhm.
this conversation has been really reminding me of high school. And Lara, you can let me know what you think about this. I had a very like non-traditional college experience, so I think that it would have shown itself as well in college if I had had a traditional experience. But in high school, I remember the same thing. It felt as though everyone around me was like just got it in one go. And
Mm.
like I specifically remember econ was really hard for me. Like my math classes were really hard for me. And I would sit like near our friends and they would just like get it all of a sudden, and it took no effort. And I'm thinking to myself, like, these friends were like out partying all night long, or like doing, like, they're actually currently high or something, like, and I'm like, and you are just like, it just makes sense in your head, and they get like A+ on all of their work. And
Mm.
I just remember feeling like kind of similar, just being like, I don't get it, you guys. Like, I literally do not understand. And it's just like a funny thing to think back on now, of just, I never
Mm.
like realized it at the time. I just was like, oh, I'm a studier. I'm not naturally smart. I just
Yeah.
am good at studying. I'm a good time management. I turn in all
Mm.
of my stuff. So like I don't miss assignments. So that's why I get like A's. But it's not because I'm just like good at the material or whatever. So I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
for
just kind of an
sure.
interesting thing, Laura. I don't know how you felt in high school around that.
Yeah, I felt like that, and then times infinity in college. Like,
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm just good. Literally, Susie, I would do the freaking exact thing as you. I would pull up, in class, I would be like glazed
Smile and
over.
nod. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I would go home, I would pull up my lecture, and I would rewatch that shit like it
Mm.
was going out of style. Like,
Oh yeah.
that is how I passed my classes. Barely, I might add.
Yeah. Yep. For
Yeah.
sure. Oh, the smiling and nodding. I know we to wrap up too, but that was actually jogged my memory too. Smiling and nodding. I like, throughout my life, I'm realizing like I was always in my family known as like the empathetic one, and someone who is really in tune with people's emotions. And that is true. I'm not saying that that is not true, but I think that regardless of what came first, that or ADHD, I think that having to read people's emotions and or social cues to like follow without really knowing what they're actually saying, say in class, became like a superpower. I don't know if you've felt that too, Lara, where it's like I know really well how to be in a conversation, and rather than really knowing, like, I'm not saying that I'm not paying attention to the conversation. It's more that I can't process what they're necessarily saying specifically, but I can now really read their emotional cues into it. And so therefore, I've become really good at picking up on people's emotions, which is really interesting. And that was actually one of the ways that my sister was like, "You have ADHD," where I was watching an episode of The Witcher, and she was like, "Hey, like, what's this about?" And I was like, "I don't know." She's like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, I couldn't tell you what it's about, but I know that, like, I know the exact, like, emotional, like, repertoire of what they're going through right now, and I can tell you why." And then so you kind of make your own translation of reality, which is really fascinating if you think about it, because it's like I still follow. It's just that I pick up on very different degrees of people's interactions that way because of my inability to be able to really actually process what they're saying. Does that make any sense? I don't know if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah.
Mallory's
Your
like,
brain your
wow.
brain finds a way of tracking somehow, even if it's
Yeah.
I get
not,
that.
you know.
Yeah, so it's like cheers ADHD to a superpower. But I mean, it gets in
Yeah.
my way, obviously, and I assume that I know a lot more than necessarily I do, but I have felt that I've been able to lean on that really well, and also use it in a loving manner to people that I love. So
For sure.
Okay, to kind of start wrapping up, I guess, Susie, I know you had some notes, but was there anything that we have not talked about today that you definitely want to make sure the
yeah,
listeners hear, or that you want us to know before we wrap up?
I think there's two, and we can kind of dive into either or none of them. It's up to you guys, but medication is one that I'd like to kind of touch on. And then there's, okay, actually let's kind of topic this next. It's basically coping mechanisms, one of which is medication, the other of which is with or without medication. Really helpful tools that I have found through my research, if that makes sense.
Yeah, let's do it. Dive right
Cool.
in.
Diving. So the first one is once I got the diagnosis, I actually went right into getting medicated for it. And that, I mean, in my past, probably from age 20 to 25, when I was really into the more holistic way of treating um, conditions, I guess, I was a little wary of medications, not in the sense that I didn't think that they were important. It was more like I want to first do everything that I can without a medication and then decide to maybe use the medication. I had gotten to the point of suffering and then got the diagnosis that I was like, sign me up, like sign me up. And the medication that I was that I was prescribed by my psychiatrist is a stimulant medication. There's a few different versions of the stimulant medication that can be used for ADHD. One of which is a short acting one, I believe. That's Adderall. I think a lot of people are familiar with Adderall. The one that I currently am taking is called Vyvanse, which is a longer lasting. It's kind of like Adderall 2.0 in the sense of they've found ways to take away the the well-known ups and downs of Adderall, where you like feel it kind of turn on, and then when you start to throughout the day you have lows once it's starting to wear off. The Vyvanse is less likely to do that. So I found that Vyvanse, like, that is the medication itself, like, yes, there are lots of things to be aware of before starting any kind of medication, and one should always talk with their primary care and their psychiatrist before starting any of those medications, which I did. I found that it was like having blurry vision and then putting glasses on for the first time and not realizing that you had a different way of seeing. Like, so within probably a week or two, like Vyvanse itself, unlike some of the anti-anxiety medications, it doesn't necessarily take a few weeks to set in. But I remember the moment I realized that it actually was starting to really work was I was at work, and finding before I started the medication that my words would often get ahead of my brain would often get ahead of my words. And so if you were to talk with me, and still like I speak very quickly, I, go on tangents, and it can be hard to follow me, and it's almost like I get out of breath because I'm like trying to like fill the space that my brain is currently like manifesting, and then I have to say it. I remember standing at a patient's bed, it was a night shift, and I was like, I just told her about a certain process that was happening, and I spoke eloquently, and I knew what I was wanting to tell her, and I was able to, I hope, make that come across, and I was supportive as well. Like everything that I was intending to happen happened. And that was just night and day, because before it would almost be as if I was like trying to speak so quickly to match the speed of my brain that I was out of breath. Whereas I was like, whoa, like this is, people experience this. This is what people actually like on a day-to-day basis can do, because I cannot. I have to literally like try to pause my brain and let my speech catch up. Whereas that was a very big shift. And now in my life, even though I've just started my journey in ADHD, which is including therapy twice a month, and keeping up with my exercise routine, eating well, specifically lots of protein and not too many like sugary kind of intakes to just make my emotions go high and low. It also includes, right now, it includes Vyvanse, and that I am the most engaged in my life that I have been since I was probably 24, 25. So, if you're considering adding something or taking something away in your journey in ADHD, and you're, worried about medication and like not being yourself, I feel the most myself. And that's my experience. With that said, you have to find a good dose and you have to calibrate it a certain way. But regardless, that's medication. And that's the one that I'm on. The other note that I think is super helpful, and this is from a psychiatrist, I believe, his name is Ned Holloway. There's two other people that I would point people to if they're doing some research on either getting diagnosed or just coping with symptoms of ADHD. Ned Holloway is one. He speaks of the mechanism of the brain that talks about our inability as ADHD individuals to really focus on one specific issue. It can actually, that's one of our strengths, because we, our brains cannot necessarily focus, but we can hyper focus. It does, however, require us to be very interested in something. And by being interested, or by, fight or flight, like you have an exam that you don't understand, like you will, fight or flight hyper focus, which is exhausting and can lead to anxiety attacks, which was my experience. Hyper focusing is actually one of our strengths in ADHD, but basically it can also be a weakness, because let me just pull up my notes because I want to make sure I'm getting this correct with what he was kind of saying. But he says basically a great attribute of ADHD is the imagination and the ability to focus. And imagination doesn't necessarily mean like daydreaming. It means like, oh, I personally, Susie, I am really into currently like redoing my apartment that I rent, DIY friendly, like renter friendly. I find a lot of pleasure in just like really focusing in on making my space perfect for me. So that's an attribute of the hyperfixation. But it can get in our way when basically the when you're hyper focusing or focusing on something that you love, you basically are activating 4 portions of your brain, and it's together called the task positive network. And that is like a happy space. It's a fulfilling space. And so, for example, I'm redoing some cabinets in my apartment. And while I'm doing that, I'm activating those 4 quadrants of my brain. But once my cabinet is finished, that activation is no longer. And the downfall of ADHD is that when those quadrants are not activated, you fall into another 4 activated regions of your brain, which is called the default mode network. And that network is basically home to the ruminating thoughts, the depression, the anxiety, the inability to be engaged in what you are doing in life, like emotionally or physically. But it's basically just the downfall of the ADHD brain. That is what is activated when the task positive network is not activated. So the task for someone who has ADHD to reset the constant rumination or the constant brain that's just not stopping is to find things in your life that you are passionate about or that just require focus. So one can be, going on a big run. When I first got diagnosed with ADHD, I knew that a lot of my gratification came from completing a small task. So I actually bought Xbox, which I've never had in my life, and I downloaded Zelda, and that's why I think a lot of people with ADHD like gaming, because it's a lot of task complete dopamine, task complete dopamine. So you actually are getting the gratification that your brain is requiring and needing, and you can focus on it versus your brain is going elsewhere. So kind of what you guys were talking about with one of your podcasts, cold showers, that is something that your body, it can only focus on the experience that it's currently in. That is another way of kind of resetting. But then in life, if you're able to kind of take that task positive network mentality into, if you are able to find a job that you can, or a lifestyle that you can manifest, the idea of pursuing something that you love and that is meaningful to you. And I know that that is something that not everyone can do because of, multiple circumstances and the way that society has set people up for either success or failure. But if you are able to find either a job or at least a pastime that you can really put your focus in on, and that may change, and it probably will if you have ADHD, weekly or daily, that's a tool, regardless of using medication, that you can really use to bring your brain away from the really deleterious side of ADHD.
That was a great summary. I feel like this is so educational too.
I know, I'm learning so much.
Susie, you do such a good job of being like, this is the experience, and then this is a real life story to help you understand the experience. It helps my brain so much. I'm like, yeah, I get that.
I feel like you'd be such a good adjunct professor.
Ooh, I would love it, and also I would also go in fight or flight mode, hyperfixation, and then also just deteriorate. But thank you.
No, I think that you would be good at that. I also just want to thank you for sharing so much about your experience in your life. And we never really know when we invite guests on, what is going to happen, and we're fine with whatever level of vulnerability they're willing to share. But I feel like you were so generous today with all of your experiences and stories, and I feel like it really made this topic even more rich. So thank you so much for all of that.
Safe to explore, I think, within yourself and other people.
For sure. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, and I think that I'm currently processing my 34 years of life, and this is actually helpful for me to be able to. So thank you guys for the free therapy session. But I think
it can really be therapeutic sometimes. Where you're just
it is, and I appreciate
it's helpful to externalize it a bit.
It is, yeah, and you don't often get that space, especially when it comes to mental health. And I think that space needs to be regarded more, and given to people more, because it's so many people are going through things that we just don't know about. So if I can share and people can resonate, then awesome, and if not, then all right, next. So
yeah, well, thank you so much for your time. Sorry, Ryan is cooking kale, if you can hear all the sizzling sounds in the background.
We can't hear it.
Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for your time and energy and willingness to share. And I'm so excited for people to hear this episode.
Me too. Yes, Susie, that was so fun. And also I feel like Lara's gonna have a lot to think about tonight.
Yeah, I was like, I think this was really revolutionary for Lara.
Give me a call, Lara. We'll talk.
We're gonna talk. I have some thoughts.
Yeah.
But no, this episode was amazing. I feel like we have no edits. There will be no edits for this pod. We're just gonna publish it.
Oh Lord.
Okay, thank you for listening, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.